thank God for giving me the abilities and the blessings, and I hope that that it's meaningful to you and it's a difference in your life also. Alrighty, ready for this? Some cool stuff I'm covering tonight. Here's one. Our electrons really, they're going to be like charges. And when it pushes that electron out of the power source, that means that this power source is lacking an electron. It's going to have a positive charge. Since electrons, it's going to be, it has a positive charge in the source. Since electrons are negative and unlike charges attract, so you push the electron out, makes this power source positive. There's electrons. So electrons leave the source and they come back to the source. That's called an electrical circuit. It's the way it works. So now let's talk about a transformer. Well, a transformer uses electromagnetism instead of like a battery using a chemical reaction. It uses electromagnetism and it forces the electrons to leave the power source, and it goes through the meter, through the main, through the panel, through the outlet, back over through the load, back on the neutral conductor, getting back to the neutral bus, getting back to the service neutral conductor, getting back here, and guess what? In other words, it isn't that on the equipment grounding conductor. It's called the effective ground fault current path. And that's what causes this, hopefully, breaker of the trip. That's how smart electrons are. Mike, why did they call it a ground fault when it's really a neutral fault, or more correctly, a source fault? No wonder people get confused. Well, Article 100 definitions, we're talking about where electrons leave the source and there's a ground fault and there's an effective ground fault current path and return back to the source. This and the normally non-current carrying conductors would be like an equipment grounding conductor, metal parts of an enclosure, raceways or equipment. So in other words, they gave it a name. But Mike, why did they call it a ground fault? Because if you look at that graphic, you can see fault current's not going to ground. Listen guys, I don't even want to go there. You can go to MikeHolt.com. Go to videos, go to grounding and bonding, watch the first video, and it gives you a little bit more history of why we use the word ground fault. It's what it's called, and that's what we're going to call it. So now, let's just review it again. Here, and you have the source grounded at this location here. When the ground fault current is returning back over to the source, depending upon where your neutral conductor might be carrying hundreds, if not thousands, of ground fault current back to the source. Hopefully to the same place. Well, that's true, they all terminate to the same location, meaning they terminate to the service neutral conductor, or the separately dry, or the aluminum size phase conductors determine what size copper or aluminum or copper clad aluminum grounding electrical conductor. So you can see that, let's say we ran 500,000, 400 amp service, 500 kc mils. Well, that's going to be a one-aught grounding electrical conductor. But if you take a look at the text says, except as permitted in 250-66A, and 66A is talking about basically a ground rod, and it says the large go to the earth? No. Where does it go to? It goes to the source. We never ground for the purpose of clearing a fault. So let's say it's a ground fault. So you'd have current leaving line 1, going to line 1, meter can, service disconnect, and now that neutral conductor is going to carry the fault current back to the source. You say, okay, so what's the big deal? But watch what happens. If you have any parts of the electrical system in contact with the structural steel, it's going to carry ground fault current. Well, Mike, how much current is it going to carry? You already have an equipment grounding conductor here, and that fault current's returning that way. And now, of course, we understand about parallel circuits, parallel current. What's the impedance of that? It's going to carry, I don't know how much current it's going to carry. But the fact is, it is going to carry fault current. And what happens if you lost your equipment grounding conductor? Not that it's designed for this, but actually there is some value here. And that is that you bond structural steel to the service neutral conductor in the event of that case also. So you can see that there is going to be ground fault current on. And And what's the largest conductor to a concrete encased electrode? It's going to be 4-gauge wire. Why did they pick 4-gauge wire? That was just the size wire they had on the truck when they did the study. And that's true. It's called a Ufer ground. So now, let's take a look at that. If you're it's a manhole. So now let's just understand the concept. If you had 120 volts traveling out to some piece of metal, all right, all I did was nothing on my phone, turn it airplane mode off and on. Guys rebooted their system, everything else like that, and they wanted to see if it was going to lock up or not. So what I would do is, they said, keep moving. So all I did was this. They were freaked out. They thought I froze up. All right, let's see what happens. Let's try this again. Ready? Whew. Okay, take a look at this illustration. Imagine you have some metal that's connected to your earth through a ground rod, but there's no effective ground fault current path. There's no equipment grounding conductor. And then there's a, what do we call this? There's a ground fault. Electrons leave the source, they travel through the overcurrent device, they get over to the metal part, they energize the metal part, they get to the ground rod, but because the contact resistance is so great that the earth cannot be used as an effective ground fault current path, it's covered by 254A5, well, then you're going to have what? If it was a 25 ohm, I is equal to E over R, 120 volts divided by 25 ohms is 4.8 amps. Guess what's happening? You're not tripping a breaker. Why? Well, because you don't ground for the purposes of clearing a ground fault. I know it sounds kind of strange, but you don't. All right. So if you had a metal pole that was connected to a ground rod, and you notice in the circuit there's no equipment grounding conductor, then there's no effective ground fault current path. When there's a ground fault that energizes the metal parts, it creates a voltage gradient around that in the earth, incredibly dangerous, doesn't clear the fault. Let's get back over to this manhole. Here's a metal cover, and they use a Tech screw to connect to that. That's a violation of 250.8, number 1. Then they take this ground wire, because it's not a grounding electroconductor, because a grounding electroconductor only is where it is required. 250.66 talks about it. Here's your ground wire, and if you follow this little guy here, somehow it goes around here, goes around there, and it goes to this ground rod. You know what? This cover would have probably never got energized. But now you take a wire and you connect it to the cover, and then you kind of string it along among all these other conductors in here, thinking that you're grounding it to a ground rod. Now what would happen if the phase conductors somehow faulted to that ground wire? You are now going to energize the cover, and will the ground rod serve the purpose as part of the effective ground fault current path to clear the fault? Nope. So here you have design that they're thinking they're doing a good job, but in reality they're creating a hazard. There's nothing in the code that says the cover of a manhole has to be connected to an effective ground fault current path. So guess what you do? You don't do this. What do you do if it's in specs? I guess you do it. It's plans and the specifications. Next one, Mike. Okay, is a neutral conductor dangerous? Those who've been around, you know. I got nailed on a neutral of a 277 480 volt circuit when I was an electrical contractor, standing on top of a ladder that says do not stand here. I'm only 5'6", probably not that much anymore. And I'm reaching up inside the ceiling and I'm hooking up 277 480 while it's hot. Okay, fine. That was like in the 70s, okay guys? That was cool. All right. Well, I hooked up the brown, the orange, the yellow, put the arms down, felt good. Took my side cutters, put on the side of that 1900 box or 4 square, whatever you call it, cut into the neutral conductor coming from the office. I got nailed. So yes, the neutral is dangerous, but let's understand why. Okay, Mike, can you get shock from a neutral conductor? Well, let's just understand the electrons, how smart they are. They leave the power supply, they go to the meter, they go to the main, they go to the panel, they come over here, they go back over here along the hot conductor, return on the neutral, they get over here, going back on the neutral, and getting back over here. Now this is a little technical. You see this neutral conductor right here? This neutral conductor is actually grounded. That means that we've established that this system, it's called system grounding, that neutral point and to this point in the earth, if you took a voltmeter, you probably should do that, between that neutral point and the grounding point, you're going to measure how many volts. What do you think? 0, because it's measuring the same point, right? You get the wire at both ends. Then over here at the neutral, if you take this neutral is also connected to the earth. Well, this is at 0 potential. This neutral here is at 0 potential. So when you take a neutral to the earth, we probably should not show it to the grounding electrode, but let's just show it to the earth. The neutral to the earth, standing on the earth, touching the neutral, you can have what? 0 volts. Okay, fine for you smart guys. Well, Mike, what do you mean? It's never going to be 0. There's lots of reasons why it's not going to be 0. Simply because you're going to have impedance on that neutral conductor as it carries current, which means you're going to have voltage drop. Mike, there's a difference between that neutral point here and this neutral point here. Okay, forgetting about that little bit of neutral voltage drop. But let's just assume you wanted to consider it. You're still not going to get shocked if you touch the neutral conductor anywhere in this circuit and you touch the earth. It would be practically 0, because nothing is ever 0. All right, but what happens, Mike? Current leads power supply, goes to the meter can, goes to the main, goes to the panel, gets over here, comes back over here, comes back on the neutral, and you took the neutral off the panel. Well, when you take the neutral off the panel, and you see this voltmeter here, I could probably put a person touching this point here, like a little stick figure, person touching this point right here, and touching this point right here. And guess what that person is? That person is in what? Series or parallel? Really important. You understand theory to understand series parallel. That person touches the neutral conductor, touches the neutral bus. They are in series with the circuit. And Kirchhoff's law of a closed loop system says that the voltage drop across the resistors in series, the total sum of those will equal the voltage source. If this is a 120 volt circuit, and you touch this point right here, and you touch this point. If it's open circuit voltage, you put a voltmeter, you're going to measure 120. But if this happened to be, let's say, 10 ohms, let's make it 20 ohms, and you happen to be 1,000 ohms, well, now it's 1,000 ohms in series with 20 ohms. Kirchhoff's law of a closed loop system is going to show you that you're going to have 1,000 divided by 1,020. That's going to be your percentage. You're pretty much going to be in series with about 120 volts, maybe 190, whatever, 119, 117. You can do the math, okay? So do the math. See, you're supposed to know how this works. So can you get hurt by neutral? Well, if the neutral is complete and the neutral is going to be grounded at the utility service or the separately derived system, and you're grounding it at the equipment, at the service equipment, not that that really makes a difference anyhow. If you touch a neutral, you touch the earth. If you take a neutral to the earth, it should go to the earth, not here. You take a neutral to the earth here, technically you're going to measure some voltage, but I didn't give you the amount of current. You don't know what the NEV voltage is, so therefore, we're just going to say it's 0 volts. But if you open a neutral and you get in series with a neutral, now you're talking about a series circuit, you're going to be very, very close to 120 volts, and many people have gotten killed by that scenario. I've been involved in a few cases with that. I hope that answers the question on the neutral. Talking about the neutral. Oh, we got time. Perfect. Even with all the stupid locking up. Troubleshooting an open neutral. Man, I can't tell you how many hours we spent on some of these graphics. My poor graphic Mike Horvath. I beat him up all day long. Are you ready for this? Let's just understand electrical circuitry. Ready for this, guys? Okay. Here's a utility transformer. Utility takes their primary neutral and they ground it to the case, and then they take the secondary neutral, they connect to the case, and the utility, they ground the system. Right? But we don't really care what they do. But I think it's a good idea to understand utility distribution systems. Okay. Then you bring your two-phase conductors in a neutral, and you go on the line side of the meter. So let's just assume you're going to a job, and you should be able to do this another. You go to the line side meter, line 1, you go to the neutral. Now, it's never going to be 120. It might be 123, it might be 117, depending upon where you are in the distribution system, what time of the day, what the loading is going to be. Basically, it's going to be about 120. So let's just make it simplicity. Line 1 to neutral, 120. Yeah, okay, good. Line 2 to neutral, 120, and that should be about the same thing. You might be getting 123 and 122 or 124 and 123, but it's about 120. Okay, good. So you go to line side of meter can, 120, 120. You go to the line side of disconnect, it should be what? 120, 120. You go to the line side of panel, line 1, line 2, it's 120, 120. You go over to the load, because you're coming out of line 1 going to the load. Well, that's going to be 120 volts. It's going to the neutral, and then you're going to go over to the other circuit. That's going to be 120. Now, I'm showing an example of a multi-wire branch circuit with 30 amps and 50 amps. What I'm trying to say is this. I'm representing all the circuits in this panel that they're all, if you put an amp meter on up here, if you put the amp meter over here on line 1, you'd measure 50 amps, line the neutral load. And if you go to line 2, you'd measure 30 amps, line the neutral load. So I'm just saying, line the neutral loads. This is what it would look like. You guys got that? You see how that works out? 120, 120, all the way down the line. So we're good. The loads are at 120, everything is fine. Now, let's talk about some numbers. This neutral point here is grounded to the earth. That's established 0 for a system voltage. That means that forgetting about the circuit voltage drop, which is 1, 2, 3 volts, we're not even going to worry about that. The voltage between the neutral and the case, because see, the neutral and the case are bonded together at the main bonding jumper. So pretty much the voltage between the neutral and the case, it's going to be about 0 volts, maybe just a tiny, it's going to be 0 in that case. For all practical, Mike, you got a little voltage drop here, but you're not going to measure that, okay? So you go neutral to the case. So you go line 1, line 2, on 120, 120, all the way down the line. Neutral to the case is going to be 0. And guess what? Neutral to the case is 0. You can't get shocked. We talked about that. So now what's the voltage of the case to the earth? Well, if the case, but the main bonding jumper is connected to the neutral, and that's connected to the earth, and the system is connected to the earth, well, there is no voltage because this is neutral. The neutral is all referenced to 0. So therefore the case, which is bonded to the neutral, which is 0. So your case to earth voltage is 0. You guys got that? That's just the way it should be. Now, what happens if squirrels love that secondary neutral aluminum wire and they kind of chew it all up? Or there's some wind, or there's a ice storm. For whatever reason, the utility loses the secondary neutral conductor. Let's follow that. As soon as they do that, now, this load was a 30 amp load and this was a 50 amp load. And the actual resistance of the load is 4 ohms, and we can do the calculation. And the resistance, the combined of all those loads. And they combined this with 50 amps. Using that same scenario, but the neutral gets open. Well now, and I have a spreadsheet. If you want that spreadsheet, I can send it to you because this is not something you can do mathematically. I couldn't figure it out. So I called Eric Stromberg, my buddy. He was just at my house the other day with his daughter, Brianna. We had a wonderful time. She's a cutie pie. I said, Eric, I can't figure this out. How? Because here's what happens. See, current leaves on line 1. Got it. It goes over to the neutral. Got it. And it comes back on the neutral, but it can't get back to the utility. But guess what? It can get to the utility because we do have, let's say, a 25 ohm ground rod. So electrons are returning to some small level. And on line 2, electrons are also going on line 2. And those, actually, both arrows should be going kind of, let's have arrows, Mike, going both ways. And the currents would be going down. It's kind of both ways. And the currents are going to go, I don't want to talk, see, when you get line 1, line 2, electrons are actually going this way with the neutral. What I'm saying is this. The neutral current, which is not there because no neutral conductor, that current is going to be 1.1 amps on the grounding electrode conductor. So you put an amp meter in the grounding electric conductor, you measure 1.1 amps. Okay. Watch what else. Because of this spreadsheet, it told me this. It said, because of this 2.4 ohms, the 4 ohm resistor, losing the neutral, having a 25 ohm ground rod, the spreadsheet did the calculation. It'll say, your line 1 voltage to neutral is going to be 92. Line 2 is going to be 148. Line of the meter, 92 and 148 to the neutral. What's it going to be at the disconnect? 92, 148. How about the panel? 92, 148. How about the loads? Well, this is going to be 148 because it has a higher amount of resistance, and this is going to be 92. What about the current? Well, it was 30 and 50, what was it? Yes, it was 30 and 50. Now it's 19.4 and 20.5 because you lost the neutral. When you lose the neutral and you're using the grounding electrode as your return path, you're going to end up having 148 volts on one phase, 92 volts in the other phase throughout the entire system. Now, here's what else you have. If you take that neutral and you go over to this case here, since you've lost that neutral, then that neutral to the case, actually, it would be 0. So I need to change that because they're both the same point here. That should be 0. I think Mike had it 0, and I told him to make it 28. Apologize. But that case to the earth is going to be 28.8 volts. See, the neutral to the case, since they're both connected together, they're going to be the same potential. So here's what you're going to get. You're going to get over this panel here. Let's go here to the panel here. You go, line 1, the neutral is going to be 92 volts. Line 2, the neutral is 148 volts. Neutral to the case is going to be 0. And then you go from the case to the earth, you're going to be 28.8. You're like, what the heck is going on here? Because you lost the neutral at the service. And you can't predict these numbers because it's a variable of what loads you turn on, what loads you turn off. Let's watch this a little further. I know it's a little confusing here. What about if you lost the neutral not to the meter can, but between the meter can and the service disconnecting means? Well, then you'd have 120 and 120 of the meter can. You know what that means? You didn't lose the neutral, not to the meter can. You get over to the service disconnect, you get 92 and 148. You know what that means? You lost the neutral to this point. Then everything else after that is 92, 148, 92, 148. This neutral case is going to be 0 volts because they're both bonded together here. The case to the earth is going to be 28.8 volts. And by the way, all you got to do is touch the case and just go to the dirt. And if you really want to do a good job, get your voltmeter that has like a little clamp on it, and then just clamp on a cute little blade of grass. You know why? That blade of grass is like the best connection to the earth you can. Why? Well, because it has all the roots in there. Try it. Test me. You're going to find out. That's cool, Mike. All right, that was free. Wasn't planning on covering that. Of course, all of this is free, but we're not going to go there. So, you lose the neutral between the meter can and the disconnect. You're trying to figure out, they're saying, hey, things are acting weird. The lights are bright, the lights are dim. Somebody's in the pool, they're getting shocked. You know, somebody's touching something. Well, guess what? Your equipment grounding conductor is 28.8 volts. The entire building is 28.8 volts, all the metal parts. Your swimming pool is 28.8 volts. Somebody walking up to the screen door outside of the swimming pool enclosure, if it's within 5 feet, right? 680.26b says that you have to bond it together. That means that the screen enclosure is 28.8 volts and you're standing outside the screen and you're standing at how many volts? 0. You're going to get nailed. Or you're in the deck, but you're outside of the perimeter bond, which is 3 feet around that pool, and you're standing in the deck inside on concrete that has no perimeter bond, then you're standing on 0, you touch the street enclosure, you're going to get nailed. That's just the way it works. Why? Well, because you lost the service neutral. So when you see voltages, strengths acting like that, here's what you do. First thing you do, go to meter can, line side, line the neutral, line the neutral. If they're 120, 120, it's not the utility state. You guys can go away. But if at the line side of meter can it's 92, 148, or 80, 160, or 140, 100, in other words, they're not the same, stop. Call the utility. Hey guys, you guys lost your neutral. Now, back over here. So you lose your neutral at this location. You're still using the grounding electric conductor. See, this is like a series parallel circuit, but it's a little bit more complicated. You need a spreadsheet. By the way, you want to know something interesting? I dropped this 25 ohms to like 15 ohms, 10 ohms, 5 ohms. Guess what happens? This 92, 148 hardly even changed. So the better the ground that you have, it's going to make almost no difference at all. I'll give you the spreadsheet. You can just check yourself. Check me. All right, here we go. All right, let's go on to the next one. But what about if you didn't lose it at the utility side? You didn't lose it between meter can and disconnect, but somehow you lost it. I had this happen to me once where it was an apartment. It was aluminum wires going into an apartment. And it's kind of strange that in a multifamily building, you don't expect to lose a neutral to the feeder to the apartment. Well, it was aluminum wire, there was a nick in it, and just blew it all up. I didn't know that at the time until I got in there. So guess what? Somebody's saying somewhere, hey, the lights are acting kind of strange. You're like, okay, no problem. I go to meter can 120, 120, utility, goodbye. I go to the disconnect 120, 120. That means from the neutral to the meter can disconnect, we're good. I go to the panel 90, 150. Okay. That means between these 2 points here is an open neutral. Don't even have, listen, you're going to look like a rock star. You're going to be like that within 5 minutes. You know that the feeder inside from the service disconnect to that panel, the neutral is open. And you can verify a little bit more though. By the way, if you lose a neutral after the service disconnect, then we're not going to be able to use the grounding electroconductor as that series parallel circuit, and that kind of changes the voltages. You just flat out go to 90 and 152. If we had that grounding electrode at 25 ohms, well, then it'd be between 92 and 148. Look at that. With the grounding electrode, it's 92, 148. Without the grounding electrode, it's 90, 150. That's what I'm saying. The earth resistance connection doesn't help at all. All right, but watch what happens. You see, because you lost neutral between the service equipment and the panel, we're not connecting to the earth. You are now simply a 240 volt series circuit. And man, series circuit rules just kick in. There's some basic rules. Current remains the same. The voltage drop of the resistors of the circuit, Kirchhoff's law, is equal to the sum of all the resistors. Voltage drops to the electrical source. I know that the source is 240. I know that if I know the resistance of R1, 2.4 ohms, the resistance of R2, 4 ohms, I can calculate the total resistance. If I know the total resistance, I know the voltage. I can calculate. This is something you can do. Be a great thing for students. Then I know the current is going to be 37.5 amperes. That's going to be it's going to be a series circuit there. Now let's understand some things. Okay. Well, this neutral to case. Oh, 1 second. This neutral to case will be 30 volts. The other ones were not, because see, I don't have that neutral. Because I've lost it on the feeder, then that neutral to case is not bonded together. So this is going to be 30 volts. So now you're in a place, you go neutral to the case, okay? If you're measuring, you know what? I just thought about something. If you measure neutral to case voltage of 30 volts or 28 volts or some voltage, that means that it's after the service, main bonding jumper. There's the one right there. Then the voltage between the case and the earth, well, this is the case is not even connected to anything because we lost that neutral to case connection here. So the case to the earth voltage is going to be 0, but the neutral to the case voltage is 30. And we can tell where it occurred. Mike Hobarth, let's make these meter colors different color on the parts that are a problem. So this could all be blue, but these could be like red because that's a problem there. All right. What else we need to know here? Okay, so you can get shocked, right? Now, the swimming pool, when you lose a neutral that goes over to the panel, well, you're not going to have any voltage on the case, okay, because it's not connected to the neutral at all. But you will have voltage between the neutral and the case. So if you happen to, in the panel and you're touching a neutral wire and you get nailed to the case, take a voltmeter between the neutral and the case, like what the heck's going on here? Another way to understand. Best thing is find out where the voltage has changed. That means you lost a neutral between those 2 points. What else we have here? Okay. Oh, this is if you lose the neutral. 1 second. This is before the panel. This is after the panel. Well, if you lose it after the panel, you still have what? A series circuit, 37.5, 150, 150. Volt between the neutral and the case is going to be 30, but between the case to the earth is going to be 0. We didn't talk about it, but there is no current traveling on the neutral conductor because we've lost it. And same thing with the previous one. There's no current traveling down the grounding electric conductor or the neutral to the utility because we've lost it. And then you have your 90, 150. I think you need to watch this whole thing all over again, right? 2 or 3 times to figure out what it is. Okay, let's show what I got there. Oh, I got done early. Brian, I'm wondering if anybody's actually hearing me because I don't see anybody, and Brian hasn't said anything to me.
Well, I was letting you get done
nobody's
because it's a
saying
pretty
anything to me.
complicated topic, so I didn't want to interrupt you.
Okay,
I
so-
have some questions when you're ready, though.
I'm ready. I'm ready.
All right. I'm going to go back a little bit because there was a comment from JW in Virginia, and he said, you said there was nothing in the code requiring connecting metal lids to equipment grounding conductor. In your grounding and bonding DVD,
Hold on. Go ahead.
there's a discussion on a girl in
I'm
New
ready.
York City getting electrocuted by a manhole lid that got energized. How does 314.30D not require this connection to an equipment grounding conductor? That's a
Okay.
good question.
What reference?
314.30D. And that's from JW. Good job, JW. Great question.
30. I'm not, well, what'd you say to JW? What did you say?
He said 314.30D.
Would you say good job? No. What did you say about him?
It
You
says a
said
great
good
question.
job?
I didn't say good job or bad job. It says a great question.
Okay, all right. It's a great question. 314.30 talks about 314.30. Get your code book out, guys. 314, because I could be making this up, right? 314. You know what I need? I need a highlighter. I need to highlight 314 so I can then find it. Let's sit there and screw around with this thing. 314. Oh, that 30. That was 27. Okay, 314 and 28. 314. 29. 30. Right there. Handholds. Done. What else? What's the next question, Brian?
All right, well,
What heck? I'm sorry.
I know you
Hold
said
on.
you're done,
Go ahead.
but
So, yeah,
he-
that's the answer.
well, I understand. I understand what you're saying. But
Okay, all right.
Could you be a
Let me
little
make-
bit more
you want more
explanatory
information?
than done for us?
Okay, you want more information? Look at 314.30. What's the rule about hold enclosures? You know what? Let's go to Article 100. I wonder if there's a definition for a handhold enclosure. Maybe. Happened? Look at that. That's amazing. Handhold enclosure. Turn the page right there, 100, as if I was there. I think
I'm
it's
going to
there.
have to highlight
Yeah,
that in
handhold
mine,
enclosure.
too.
Okay. You did say good job, by the way. That's why I said, what'd you say? And you said, well, I
I
didn't
think
say
it
was
is a good question.
No, you said good job. You listen to the video again.
In my brain,
You go back.
I'm sitting here going,
No.
how can you not put an equipment
No, no,
grounding conductor
stop.
to a lid? But that's what the code says, right?
Well, that's that. Somebody's moving my mouse, Brian. Are you moving
Not
my
on
mouse
purpose.
here? Because something.
I don't think so.
Okay, so let me get the graphic back. What the heck's going on here? Okay. The definition of a handhold enclosure in 314.30 deals with handhold enclosures. Listen to the word handhold. Handhold. An enclosure for use in underground systems provided with an open or closed bottom and sized to allow personnel to reach into but not enter. There you go. What do you
Is
think
that the
about
Mike
that?
Holt version of a mic drop? Is that what that was?
Exactly. Just slam that sucker right down. Dang. But let me give you guys a little suggestion, a little thing. I thought 314.30D applied initially. Okay, now let's go back to 314.30. If this was a handhold, which is not, and it doesn't apply, you would go to 314.30D. Actually, yeah. Actually, 314.30D only says you have to have a lug. That doesn't say you have to connect anything to it. Let's see if there's a rule somewhere. Yeah, it just says you have to have a lug. So there's nothing in 314.30D say that you have to connect. If this was a handhold, that you put your hand in it, you can't get in it, then the metal cover would have to have a lug. Brian, do you agree with that?
That's
You
sure
got your
what it
code book
looks
there,
like.
Brian? You doing
I'm
this with
looking at it right here.
That's So now, you want the rule that says you have to connect that?
Yeah,
Ready,
for
Brian?
that one.
250-86. This is the most underused code rule I have ever used in my entire life. And it is the most important code rule almost that I ever used. And I learned that while I was getting ready for this. So I'm just one step ahead of you guys. Go to 250.86. This is like, are you kidding me there? Who uses this rule? Who pays attention to 250.86? Give me the page if you get there before I get there. 125. Okay, thank you. 250.86. I like.
Wow.
The cool thing is, if you have your code book and you highlight every rule I ever talked about, and if you get my libraries and you complete this, you're making your book custom. I still haven't got my tabs on yet. All right, not there. Ready for this? Except if permitted 251.12i, metal enclosures and raceways for other service conductors shall be connected to an equipment grounding conductor, right? Except the metal enclosures and raceways. That doesn't require the cover. I don't know where is there a rule. Okay, so there's no rule to require you to bond that metal cover of a handhole to an equipment grounding conductor. It just requires that you have it there.
Yep, I just highlighted mine and made a note for you.
Okay, so, but if there was a handhole, it still doesn't apply. There's no technical rule there to cover it. But this is a manhole. And 314.30D does not require us to have this lug.
All right, Adrian would like you to go back to your service graphic for us. And he was just struggling. Okay. He didn't see the ground rod connection, and I saw that it was like real short there.
Boy, weirdest thing is I can't even have access to my, let me try something here. Which one? Maybe back over here in the beginning? Oh, the meters, okay. Okay. He didn't see the ground rod? It's right there. Done.
It was where the text box was covering it up when he submitted the question, so that's why he didn't see it.
Is that
see
okay?
How the ground rod was covered up by the text box. When you were talking, it wasn't real obvious that's where the ground rod was, so he was struggling with that. So Adrian, yeah, there's
right.
a ground rod.
Oh, okay, you can't see it. Oh, I see right there. I see what you're saying. Okay,
no
good point.
Right. Let me see. I
what
think
else?
we might have one more. Research put a comment.
Hey, guys, give us some more.
Manholes are not within the scope of Article 314. We know research.
Right.
But it was still a good
question.
question.
Yeah, we know 314. Yeah.
Oh.
And by the way,
another comment from research.
Somebody got something for us?
314.30D does require the cover to be bonded. Metal covers and other exposed
conductive
surfaces shall be bonded.
Hold on. Brian. Let's wait till at least I get to it. I know it's highlighted. Let me read it. A means shall be provided in each metal box for the connection of an equipment grounding conductor. The means shall be permitted to be tapped. Okay, what am I missing here? What is research saying?
314.30D. It says metal covers and other exposed conductive surfaces shall be bonded in accordance with 250.92 if the conductors in the handhole are service conductors.
Oh, you know what? 1 second, I screwed up. I highlighted D over here, but guess what? D is down here. So let me go find 14D.
14D. It's on the left-hand side of the page.
40D.
314.30D.
Oh, I did that earlier and I screwed up. That's why I got my answer wrong. All right, let me read it again now. You ready for this? As if I didn't say anything before. Handhold enclosure covers shall have an identifying mark or logo that prominently identifies the function of the enclosure, such as electrical. Handhold enclosure covers shall require the use of tools to open, or they shall weigh 100 pounds. metal covers, let me highlight that, metal covers and other exposed conductive surfaces shall be bonded according to 250.92 if the conductors in the handhold are the surfaces, or 250.96a if the conductors in the handle are feeders of branch circuits. Okay, so because I went to the wrong one, I thought that text was there, but I kept looking at D and I didn't see it there. So in a handhole, you're not required to put a terminal. You are required to connect a handhole enclosure to an equipment grounding conductor. What did 40? What's 314.40 that I messed up?
40
is
is metal boxes, conduits, and fittings, construction specifications.
Oh, which says you have to have a grounding
Right.
terminal. Okay, so 314.40D says you need to have a grounding terminal for
That's
that
okay.
cover.
I
I
was
think
actually
maybe.
agreeing with you and reading the same thing that you were reading until Don said that, and I was like, oh,
So
look, D is on the other side of the page.
Oh, she
I
did
was
the
reading
same thing.
you were.
Well, that's the first time I've actually done that mistake, but on video of all times, live. I could have edited this out if this was like at a studio.
All right, so I got a question from
What else?
Romeo. He says, is it too basic for Mike to explain the separation of neutral and grounds on a sub panel?
All right, let's do it right now. Real quick. Ready, guys? Let's go to the graphic here that is correct. This is the way it's supposed to be, right? 120, 120, 120, 120, 120, 120, neutral to case is going to be 0, earth is all going to be 0, right? Well, if current leaves the source and it comes back to the source, well, we don't want current traveling on this equipment grounding conductor. So how do you prevent that? You don't put a screw here. Right there. So guys, it's really, forget about this sub panel, all this other crap. You can't have the neutral in parallel with the equipment grounding conductor. And man, you guys don't really get the theory figured out. It's really hard to hear what I'm saying. I'm not saying, Romeo, you don't understand theory, so don't misunderstand that. I'm just saying when I go to explain something, I'm using terms that are like, what is parallel impedance, reactance? You don't even know what I'm talking about. So hopefully you will get back some basics. So Romeo, if I had installed a screw between this point right here, well then guess what's going to happen? Oops, sorry. Well then this neutral is in parallel with this equipment grounding conductor. You can never, 250.6, you can never have neutral current carrying on your equipment grounding conductor. You think, Brian, that explains it?
I think it does, Mike. And, you know, I think there's a really
tell you
good
what.
point to make right here. And that is this, that we don't actually think as electricians that a lot of what we do is theory. And it really is. And if you are in the service industry and you think that you don't need to know theory, if you want to be a really good service guy, and just take this from me, I grew up in the service industry. That's how I cut my teeth. You need to understand theory, because if you can't understand where the electrons are flowing in the circuit, it's impossible for you to troubleshoot a problem on a circuit. It really is.
Well, Mike, how do the electrons know how to get back to the source? Okay, these are the kind of things. Now, tell you what I'm going to do, Brian. I made a note. 250.6. I will cover objectionable current. But hopefully, guys, don't try to use words. Understand electrical theory. We don't have the neutral in parallel with the equipment grounding conductor, which means you do what? You have to bond it at the service. Done. Hopefully that answers that question. You think that answers it?
I think that answers it. I think you got it.
Okay, Brian, any last questions? If not, we are
have
done.
one that's come up twice, and I
tell
think
you
we should
what,
do it real quick.
gas piping is going to be covered next week in the NEC.
We've got one that's come up twice, and I think we should just real quick do it, or tell them you're going to cover
Okay.
it one way or the other.
Okay.
JW says, I often see and at times do applications involving transitioning from non-metallic to metallic raceways. I know to make sure that...
I have that covered.
You
I
do
got
have
that
that covered.
covered. But you know what? I'm going to cover it, but I can just give you right now the answer. We got some slides. We're going to do that. It's Mike. When you're transitioning between a PVC to a metal raceway or a metal raceway to PVC, how do you handle that? Real quick one. Go to 250.86. I'm telling you, we're going to be using 86 all the time. And guess what? It's highlighted in my book because I just highlighted. And it says this: metal enclosures and metal raceways shall be connected to the equipment grounding conductor. Bingo. All metal raceways have to be connected to the equipment grounding conductor.
When his question was...
All enclosures have to be connected to an equipment grounding conductor.
His question was, is it only required to be on one side, is what he was getting to.
Metal raceways have to be connected to an equipment grounding conductor. How many times do you have to connect a metal raceway to an equipment grounding conductor to connect it to an equipment grounding conductor? Listen up, guys. Let me try this again to you. How many times, if it says you have to connect it to an equipment grounding conductor, how many times you have to connect it to the equipment grounding conductor? Mike, I got a down pipe, and then I'm going to go to with metal raceway, and then I'm just going to go underground conductors, or I'm going to go to PVC. Guys, you got to connect that metal raceway to an equipment grounding conductor. Mathematically, think about it. How many times can you do it when one end is connected to the enclosure and the other end is in the dirt? You can only connect it what? Once. And guess why? How many times do you need to connect it in there to clear a fault? To clear a what? A ground fault. Once. So if you have a piece of metal and you go to PVC, now what you can't do is put a metal conduit body between PVC, right? You can't have like an LB between PVC because then all metal enclosures and metal raceways have to be connected to an equipment grounding conductor, and conduit bodies don't come with a grounding lug. So guys, connect it to the equipment grounding conductor every single time. How could you do that? Well, you could use lock nuts. You can use a bonding, bushing, bonding jumper. You know, you're an electrician. Just
well, Mike, I think this comes back to the same thing, and that is you need to understand how those electrons flow. This is really still theory.
You know,
and I'm not, beating anybody up here.
No, you're right.
But really, if you understand where that electron is flowing and how it's flowing and where it's trying to go, then it's a little bit easier to understand why you would only need to make one connection at one end of the pipe or of the raceway, I should say.
You're so right. See, every time I teach, every time I'm conversing, I'm watching the electrons and how the electrons are moving. I understand what a ground fault is and the effect of ground fault current path. Somebody say, well, Mike, when do you ground the neutral at the sub panel? That's because, see, they don't understand theory. They don't understand that if you ground it at if you bond it to sub panel and you do it to service, you got a parallel path on the equipment grounding conductor. That violates 250.6. That means you don't know theory. That means you don't know the code. That means you're just trying to remember how to do it mechanically. So now you're mechanically installing a metal raceway and PVC, and you're thinking, man, I don't know about this. Don't you have to connect both ends? Well, that's because you don't understand the theory that if the metal enclosure is connected to an equipment grounding conductor, and if there was a fault inside that metal enclosure or that metal raceway, clearly it's going to go back to the effective ground fault current path to the clear. So there's a difference in what I'm teaching, and I'm teaching everything based upon the knowledge of theory, that if you don't know theory and the terms, you're just trying to see how these things mechanically work. And so that's what you're saying, Brian. And that's very profound. Yep. I missed that point. Now I understand why. That didn't make any sense. We're going to question, like, how do you know the electrons? How do the electrons know how to get back to the source? I'm like,
right.
Oh, gosh.
All right. I think that's it for questions.
Sorry for the little bit of stuff in the beginning. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but Brian
we actually ended up sorting it
it
out. We found out that it was here at the control center. We had a network issue, and we got all that sorted out. It was not your fault. I know. Puff your chest out, straighten your shirt. I know. So it wasn't your fault this time.
Good. Guess what? That puppy is plugged in. Just saying. All right, guys. Listen, tomorrow night, I'm going to be talking about, I'm making videos. I'm going to be talking about why somebody should get into the electrical trade and what the future looks like. So if you know anybody who wants to be an electrician, or if you have a son or a cousin or a friend, or you want to contribute because you feel like, man, this is a great industry, I would love to be able to help Mike explain to people what kind of person is the profile to be an electrician, to be in the electrical industry, and why should you become an electrician? My son's going to be on tomorrow with you, Brian, because he's an electrical contractor. So, I mean, I got a little credibility here. And my son's an electrical contractor, And I'm glad he's in that industry. So, and I have 7 kids. And I think it's great that it's a wonderful trade, man. I love electricity. I love you guys. I love what I do. I love the career. So I'm excited about maybe making a video that you guys can play to somebody. Say, hey, you know what? You're at a restaurant there. You see this guy. Say, listen, here, go to this MikeHolt.com, whatever, / beginner, and then watch this video. We need to get people in the trade. We need to get qualified people in the trade. And that's what it's about tomorrow night. So help me, give me some feedback, and have somebody watch that you might think be interested in getting as an electrician. I would love for them to be able to give us some questions like, well, what about this and what about that? Tomorrow night, 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Good night, guys. See you in the morning. Or not.